My own daughter looked me in the eye at her wedding and said, "Mom, you're not invited. Go away before you embarrass me." Those words cut deeper than any blade. I am Loretta Johnson, 63 years old, an African-American mother who has lived her whole life working night shifts and double shifts, carrying the weight of bills and debts, sacrificing love and freedom so that my only child, Danielle, could have a life of comfort. I walked into that ballroom expecting to see joy, expecting to watch her vows, expecting at least a smile of gratitude. Instead, I was thrown into hell under chandeliers brighter than the stars, surrounded by silk gowns and champagne laughter. The room went silent when I entered. My simple navy dress clung to me awkwardly under the golden lights, and my scuffed black heels echoed too loudly on the marble floor. Eyes darted toward me, some curious, others pitying, most judgmental. I held the invitation card tight in my palm, the very one I had paid for, as if it could shield me from their stares. Then Danielle stepped forward radiant in an ivory lace gown that cost more than I made in an entire year, her face painted with elegance but frozen with disdain. She didn't whisper. She raised her voice so every guest could hear. "Mom, you don't belong here. You'll only shame me in front of Jamal's family. Leave. Now." Gasps rippled across the tables. Silverware paused midair, and the scent of lilies and roses flowers I had ordered on my own credit card turned sour in my nostrils. Behind her, Marjorie Jamal's mother, dripping with diamonds and arrogance, smirked with satisfaction. She leaned closer and said loudly, "Some people just don't know their place." The nearest guests chuckled nervously, and I felt their eyes tearing into my skin. I wanted to scream her name to remind her of who I was. I wanted to shout, "Danielle, do you remember the nights I stitched your prom dress by hand because I couldn't afford a new one? Do you remember how I ate leftover sandwiches so you could have fresh fruit in your lunchbox? Do you remember when I sold my parents' home to send you to London for school?" But my throat locked. Danielle's eyes narrowed with finality. "You're nothing but shame to me." Her words landed like a hammer. My chest burned, but my legs moved on their own. I turned each step away from her, echoing like a verdict. My vision blurred as chandeliers fractured into shards of light. Behind me, Marjorie slipped smoothly into the empty space, her hand curling around Danielle's arm as if to claim what was mine. I was erased in real time. Outside, the December air slapped my face cold, but the cold steadied me. I gripped the handle of my old Chevy truck, the same one that had carried Danielle to school every day of her childhood, and whispered, "They think I'm gone. They think I'm powerless. But 2 hours from now, everyone in that hall will know whose blood paid for their luxury." The ballroom doors closed behind me, but I wasn't truly gone. I lingered just long enough in the shadows of the corridor to hear the sound of laughter swelling again, the orchestra striking up another jazzy tune, as though my humiliation was nothing but an intermission. My heart thudded slow and heavy, but I forced myself to breathe, to take in the details, to burn every sound and every face into my memory. Because memories like these, when soaked in shame, have a way of becoming fuel. I had to see more, so I slid back into the room, staying close to the columns along the wall. My presence went unnoticed at first. Guests were too busy clinking glasses and flashing pearls. From this vantage point, I saw my daughter seated at the head table, glowing under spotlights, her laughter forced brittle around the edges. Beside her, Marjorie adjusted Danielle's veil as though she had birthed her herself. The image burned my insides. It wasn't just rejection, it was replacement. The smell of roasted duck and garlic butter filled the air, wafting past me from waiters carrying silver trays. I remembered skipping meals for weeks so Danielle could have piano lessons, and now she sat before delicacies I could not even pronounce without blushing. The strings swelled, and the announcer declared the couple's first dance. Jamal led her to the floor, but I caught his eyes flickering uneasily toward me. He knew. He knew whose money had carried this wedding into existence. Yet he looked away, cowardly, choosing silence over truth. As they swayed, Marjorie's friends gossiped at the nearest table. One, her bracelets clinking, whispered, "Imagine growing up with that woman as your mother. No wonder Danielle keeps her distance. She had to elevate herself somehow." Another laughed. "She should be grateful her daughter even acknowledges her existence." Their words sliced through the music, each syllable another lash on my back. I dug my nails into my palms until I felt crescents of pain. Then the lights shifted, spotlighting the toast. Danielle stood champagne in hand and her voice rang out. I want to thank everyone who made this night possible, especially Jamal's family for welcoming me with such grace, with such class, with such generosity. The crowd erupted in applause. She smiled wide and I saw it, the deliberate omission. Not a single mention of me. Not a hint that I had scraped and bled for decades so she could stand tall in this room. Instead, she publicly crowned Marjorie as her savior, her benefactor, her mother in all but name. Every cheer from the audience felt like stones hurled at my chest. I swayed slightly, steadying myself on the column while the champagne flute in Danielle's hand glimmered with bubbles bought on my card. I wanted to scream, to rush forward to expose her lies right there. But no, a deeper voice inside me hissed, "Not yet. Not like this. Let her rise higher. The higher she climbs, the harder she falls." Then came the cruelest twist of the night. As Danielle leaned down to kiss Jamal, Marjorie caught my eye across the room. She lifted her glass, smirking as if toasting me personally, mouthing the words, "She's mine now." That smirk did what Danielle's rejection could not. It ignited fury hot enough to melt the shame that had drowned me minutes earlier. I walked out of that ballroom again, but this time not as a discarded mother. I walked out as a storm gathering strength. The humiliation was done. The revenge had begun. And while their music played louder, while their laughter filled the hall, none of them knew that the very ground beneath their celebration was about to split open. I pushed the ballroom doors open once more this time, not slinking in shadows, but stepping into the blaze of chandeliers. Conversations faltered. Laughter snagged in throats, and for a breath the music stumbled before the band found its rhythm again. My heels clicked against the marble steady this time, no tremor in my knees. Danielle's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing with fury, the way a spoiled child glares when caught with sticky hands in the cookie jar. "Mom!" she hissed through clenched teeth, her smile still plastered on for the guests. "I told you to leave. You don't belong here." I moved closer, weaving between tables draped in white silk, brushing past guests, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My voice came low but firm, carrying more weight than I intended. "Danielle, I raised you. At least let me hear the vows. At least give me that." Her mask cracked, anger spilling through. "You gave me nothing but shame. Look at you cheap dress-worn shoes. You drag me down every time you appear. Marjorie gave me what you never could dignity class respect." She spit those words like venom, but it was the way she glanced toward Marjorie that told the truth. She was parroting a puppet dangling from new strings. Marjorie leaned back in her chair, sipping champagne with practiced poise. "Oh, darling, don't waste your time explaining to her. Some people are simply allergic to refinement." A ripple of chuckles rolled across her friends at the table, their pearls and diamonds glinting in the light. My blood boiled, but I locked my spine straight. "Allergic? No. I'm seasoned by sacrifice. You wouldn't know the taste of hunger, Marjorie. You wouldn't know the sting of a bill you couldn't pay. But Danielle does. She lived it beside me, even if she pretends she didn't." Danielle flushed the memory tugging at her despite herself, but she shook it off, doubling down. "Enough, you will not ruin this night. You will not embarrass me in front of Jamal's family." Her voice rose, carrying across the hall. Guests craned their necks, murmurs growing louder. I reached out, placing my hand gently on hers, hoping some spark of memory might pierce her armor. She yanked away as if burned. "Don't touch me!" she spat, her face twisted in disgust. Before I could answer, Marjorie snapped her fingers. Two uniformed security men appeared at her side, summoned like loyal hounds. "Escort this!" "Woman out," she ordered, dripping contempt on the word woman, as though I were vermin invading her pristine hall. The guards stepped forward. One of them, a young black man with eyes full of discomfort, hesitated. He knew. He had seen mothers like me his whole life, the backbone of families discarded once our usefulness was drained. But orders were orders, and he reached for my arm. I pulled back before his hand could touch me, raising my chin high. My voice rang out strong enough to cut through the rising whispers. "You can push me out of this room, Danielle. You can erase my name from your mouth. But you cannot erase the truth. Every flower in this hall, every bite of food, every crystal glass, it all carries my fingerprints. Without me, there is no wedding tonight. A hush fell heavy, broken only by the clink of a dropped fork. Danielle's face drained of color. Marjorie, however, smirked wider, unafraid. Empty words, she said smoothly. She can't touch us. Look at her, she's powerless. The guards flanked me, waiting. For a moment, I considered unleashing everything right there, ripping through the illusion and exposing the contracts, the receipts, the ownership. But no, that same cold voice inside me whispered again, not yet. Let them laugh, let them dance, let them choke on their arrogance. Then take it all. I turned my head high and walked out under the weight of 100 eyes. This time, I didn't tremble. This time, I carried with me not humiliation, but the sharp edge of purpose. They thought they had silenced me. They had only written the opening lines of their own downfall. The night air cut into me as I stepped outside for the last time. It was December, cold, sharp enough to sting my cheeks, but it felt cleaner than the perfume-soaked ballroom I had left behind. My old Chevy truck sat at the curb, its paint chipped and faded, the headlights fogged from years of wear. I slid inside and closed the door, letting the silence swallow me whole. My hands trembled on the steering wheel, not from weakness this time, but from the storm building inside. I sat there in the dark, the muffled music still spilling from the hall, each beat pounding like an insult. For a moment, I let my eyes close, and behind my lids came the memories Danielle at 5 years old curled against my chest after a nightmare whispering, "Don't ever leave me, Mama." Danielle at 12 begging for piano lessons I couldn't afford, so I cleaned offices overnight until I had enough to pay the teacher. Danielle at 16 twirling in the prom dress I had sewn by hand, unaware that my own stomach had been empty for days to save the fabric money. Every sacrifice, every wound, every sleepless night was written in the lines on my face. And tonight, all of it had been denied, erased with a smirk and a command to go away. I pressed the ignition, but instead of driving off, I reached for my phone. The glowing screen lit up my lap, and with a few swipes, I opened the banking app. My breath steadied as the numbers appeared. Every flower, every catered meal, every musician, every flicker of candlelight in that ballroom paid for with my accounts. And not just tonight. The condo Danielle lived in, the car she drove, the tuition receipts from college and graduate school. All of it tied back to me. They thought I was powerless. They thought an old woman in a worn-out dress could be pushed aside like dust. They had no idea that beneath the calluses and exhaustion, I had built something. Quietly, carefully, I had bought up properties back in the 90s when the neighborhoods were crumbling and no one else wanted them. I had rented them, repaired them, held on while their value grew. What Marjorie and her rich friends paraded as class was nothing compared to what I owned in silence. I scrolled through contracts, digital receipts, scanned agreements. My fingers were sure now, no longer trembling. Then I hit the contact list and pressed the number I had saved under C. It rang twice before a deep voice answered. "Loretta, I didn't expect to hear from you tonight." "Tyrone," I said, my voice calm, cold, like steel. "I need you to be ready. Everything I've funded, everything I own, everything tied to Danielle's wedding, I want it pulled frozen or shut down. Tonight." There was a pause, then a low whistle. "So it's finally come to this." She told me to leave, in front of everyone, called me shame. I want her to feel what it means when the one she shamed removes her hands. Tyrone's voice hardened. "I'll make the calls. Vendors venue all of them. You hold the contracts. They have to listen." I leaned back against the cracked leather seat, the cold from the window seeping into my skin, steadying me. Good. Let them dance. Let them drink. Let them think they've won. In an hour, the music will stop and they'll know whose blood built that palace they flaunt. A slow smile tugged at my lips, not of joy, but of resolve. The humiliation had birthed something sharper, something deadlier than rage. For the first time that night, I felt no shame, no trembling. I felt power hidden all these years, now unchained. I ended the call and stared at my reflection in the rearview mirror. The woman staring back at me wasn't broken, wasn't erased. She was rising, ready to strike, and as the distant sound of jazz floated from the hall, I whispered to my own reflection, "They wanted me gone. Tonight, I'll show them what gone really means." The first call Tyrone made was to the catering company. I could hear his voice firm, commanding through the speakerphone as I sat in my truck, the heater humming softly. "Contract holder is Loretta Johnson. Payment source is her account. Immediate cancellation effective tonight. There was pushback at first, some stammering about obligations, but Tyrone cut them short. Do you want a lawsuit in the morning? Pull the food. Now. I pictured it as he spoke, waiters lifting silver platters back into the kitchen, trays of roasted duck and garlic butter vanishing before they reached the tables. Guests staring at empty plates, confusion spreading like a shadow across the laughter. Next came the florist. Tyrone read out the invoice number I knew by heart. Remove every arrangement. This is a breach of trust by the client, and the payer is withdrawing authorization. I closed my eyes, and in the dark, I saw lilies and roses, thousands of dollars worth, being stripped from vases' stems, tossed into bins, petals falling onto the marble floor like confetti of ruin. The band followed. Tyrone gave them a choice: stop playing now or face non-payment and litigation. Minutes later, through the ballroom doors, the music faltered, stuttered, then collapsed into silence. Murmurs rose, glasses clinked nervously. The hush was heavy, suffocating. I imagined Marjorie's face paling as one vendor after another packed up her grip on control, slipping. Danielle's forced smile cracking in front of her guests. Jamal shifting uncomfortably as whispers spread. What's going on? Who's responsible? Then came the lights. Tyrone made one final call, this time to the event coordinator. Loretta Johnson withdraws all authorizations for tonight's services. Shut it down. And like the heavens answering chandeliers flickered once, twice, then dimmed. The golden glow that had bathed Danielle in false royalty drained away, leaving harsh shadows and exposed nerves. I stepped out of my truck and walked back toward the hall, my boots crunching against the icy pavement. When I entered, the scene was chaos. Half-cleared tables, wilted bouquets abandoned on the floor, guests standing in clusters whispering furiously. Danielle stood near the stage, her gown clutched in her fists, her eyes wide with panic. Marjorie barked orders at the staff, but they ignored her, wheeling carts of food out, pulling cords, rolling up carpets. Danielle spotted me first, her voice cracked high and shrill, carrying over the stunned silence. Mom, what did you do? I moved forward, slow, steady, the sound of my heels echoing against the marble. I let the silence hang, let every eye fix on me before I spoke. My voice came cold and deliberate. You wanted me gone. You wanted me erased. Tonight you'll see what gone truly means. Gasps rippled. Guests turned, some covering their mouths, others staring with open fascination. The bride, the shining jewel of the evening, exposed as powerless unraveling before them. Danielle rushed forward, grabbing my arm, her nails biting into my skin. You're ruining everything! You can't do this! Her eyes darted wildly, searching for Marjorie, for Jamal, for anyone to save her. But no one moved. I leaned close enough for only her to hear. Everything in this room is mine. I gave it to you and now I've taken it back. You told me I was shame. Tonight shame is all you'll eat. She staggered back, her lips trembling. Jamal tried to steady her, but his eyes betrayed him. He was already calculating the fallout, already reconsidering vows not yet spoken. And then, like thunder following lightning, the full collapse came. Vendors rolled out the wedding cake layer by layer until only the bare metal stand remained. Staff carried away the champagne fountain, leaving rings of spilled liquid on the white linen. Guests began filing toward the exits, muttering about humiliation, about disgrace, about how they had never seen such a debacle. Danielle crumpled onto the stage, her dress pooling around her like a defeated queen stripped of her crown. Marjorie hissed, grabbing her arm, but Danielle shoved her away. The rift between them was already tearing. And I, the woman they had tried to erase, stood in the center of the chaos with nothing but calm in my chest. The humiliation they had gifted me was now doubled, tripled, and returned to them in front of every witness. This was not rage anymore. This was justice. And justice had only just begun. The ballroom faded from my mind as I stood there watching Danielle collapse in front of her guests. My eyes drifted beyond the chandeliers, beyond the marble, and into the years that had carried me here. I was 21 when I first held her small and fragile in a hospital room that smelled of bleach and despair. Her father had walked out weeks before she was born, leaving nothing but a crumpled note that read, "I can't do this." I remember clutching that baby tighter than I had ever held anything in my life and whispering, "Don't worry. Mama will do it all." And I did. Those first years, I worked days in a diner. Nights scrubbing floors in office buildings where no one even looked at me, their trash, my burden. My hands cracked from bleach. My back ached from lifting, but Danielle always had milk, always had clothes pressed neat for school. I skipped meals, patched my own shoes, ignored the headaches that came from exhaustion. She never saw that part. Children rarely do. At 12, she wanted piano lessons. I remember the look in her eyes, hopeful pleading. I couldn't afford it, not on diner tips and janitorial wages. But I found a teacher willing to take cash $10 a week, so I took on another night job cleaning a hotel laundry room. The sound of the washers thundering all night still rings in my bones. But Danielle got her lessons, and at the spring recital, she wore a dress I stitched by hand from fabric scraps. She played with trembling fingers, but to me, it was symphony. When she turned 16, she begged for a car. Everyone else has one. She said, her voice sharp, impatient. I didn't tell her that I sold the last of my mother's jewelry to make the down payment. I didn't tell her I ate ramen for 6 months so she could drive to school in something that wouldn't embarrass her. She never asked how. She just tossed me the keys after curfew, the smell of perfume and smoke lingering. And when college came, Lord, I thought I would break. The tuition letters arrived like daggers, each number larger than the last, but by then I had been planning. Quietly, carefully, I had been buying properties in neighborhoods everyone else had written off. Crumbling duplexes, boarded up row houses, places where sirens were the soundtrack of the night. I saw what others didn't, that the city was changing, that one day those bricks would be gold. I painted walls myself, patched roofs, scrubbed graffiti until my knuckles bled. I rented them to single mothers, to students, to men fresh out of prison trying to start over. I charged fair rent enough to pay the mortgage enough to keep the lights on. Slowly, the neighborhoods grew. Values rose, and I held on to those deeds like lifelines. By the time Danielle graduated smiling in her cap and gown, I had 4 properties paid off, 3 more under lease, and a folder thick with contracts. She thought the scholarships and grants had carried her. She never knew it was my sweat equity, my hidden empire that paved her way. But here's the thing about sacrifice: when it's unseen, it's taken for granted. Danielle wore designer shoes to job interviews, bought lattes with my credit card, lived in a condo I had signed for in cash. And still, she let Marjorie whisper poison into her ears about shame, about class, about dignity. She never knew that I sat at night with spreadsheets calculating every dollar, every cent. That I learned the language of contracts and leases because no one else would protect me. That Tyrone, once a boy from our block, now a lawyer, had been my ally for decades, ensuring my name was on every paper that mattered. Standing in that ballroom with guests scattering like startled birds, I felt those years wrap around me like armor. Every insult, every humiliation Danielle had thrown at me tonight was blunted by the truth she was standing on a foundation I had built stone by stone, and tonight I had pulled it out from under her. I remembered one winter in particular, 1994. The pipes in our little rental froze, bursting and flooding the kitchen. Danielle was only 4, crying as water spread across the floor. I held her in my lap, rocking her as cold seeped in, whispering that one day she would never have to live like this. That night, soaked and shivering, I vowed I would own walls that could not betray me. And I did. Now, decades later, my daughter stood betrayed not by failing pipes, but by her own arrogance. She had chosen Marjorie's jewels over my hands, chosen mockery over memory. And yet every flower, every song, every bite of food at her wedding still traced back to me. I inhaled deeply the scent of wilting roses and spilled champagne, filling my lungs. The guests would remember tonight not as a celebration, but as a reckoning. They would whisper of the mother who rose from humiliation with iron in her veins, the mother who reclaimed her worth in front of all. And in that moment, I knew the power I had hidden all these years wasn't just money, wasn't just deeds. It was resilience. It was survival turned into empire, and now, finally, it was weapon. The next morning, headlines spread across town faster than fire. High society wedding ends in chaos, read one. Bride left in tears after services pulled, mid-ceremony, said another. Photos circulated. Danielle collapsed on the stage. Mascara streaked down her face. Marjorie clutching her pearls as though the very ground had betrayed her. And in every caption, a single detail pulsed like a heartbeat. All expenses had been paid by the bride's mother, Loretta Johnson. Phones began ringing before dawn. Tyrone called first. "Loretta, it's working." Vendors are angry, caterers, florists, even the band. They are filing breach reports, but every contract points back to you. You own the signatures. They have no case. I thanked him quietly, my voice still rough from lack of sleep. I had sat up all night at my kitchen table, the hum of the fridge, the only sound, sipping black coffee as I replayed every sneer, every word of Danielle's rejection. Each replay hardened me, not softened me. By noon, the fallout had rippled into Danielle's life. Jamal's family, who had watched in horror as their expensive reputations drowned in embarrassment, demanded answers. His father, a banker, refused to release the wedding gifts they had promised. His mother, lips tight with disdain, whispered loudly enough for others to hear, "This union is a mistake." Jamal himself came knocking on my door 2 days later, suit-wrinkled eyes hollow. He stood on my porch like a lost boy, his hands fidgeting. "Mrs. Johnson," he began, voice low. I didn't know all of it was you. I thought Marjorie said." I cut him off with a hand. "Jamal, if you have come here to beg for Danielle, save your breath." He shifted uncomfortably, shame tightening his jaw. She's unraveling. She won't eat, won't sleep. People won't return her calls. She said you could fix it, that you could talk to the papers, make it right." I stared at him, this man who had stood silent while my daughter shoved me out of her own wedding. "Fix it," I said softly. "Did she fix it when she called me shame? Did she fix it when she told me I wasn't invited?" He dropped his gaze. "She's my fiancée. Or she was." The last words slipped out without intention, but I caught them. "She was," I repeated. "Maybe that's the only truth spoken in this whole mess." He left without another word, shoulders sagging, the sound of his car engine fading like the end of a storm. Meanwhile, Marjorie fared no better. The society circles she once ruled with her clipped laugh and diamond bracelets turned on her. She had vouched for Danielle, paraded her as a perfect daughter-in-law, only to have the grand wedding exposed as hollow-funded not by wealth, but by a woman she mocked. Invitations dried up. Friends whispered. Some even snickered when she entered a room. In her world, reputation was currency, and hers had been set aflame. Danielle tried to reach me at first with calls ignored, then with messages deleted. "Mom." I didn't mean it. One voicemail stammered. It was Marjorie, she pressured me. I was nervous. "Please, we can fix this." Another more desperate, "I'll die without Jamal." "He won't look at me. You ruined me. Please, please undo it." Each message cut, but not deeply. I had bled enough over the years. Now those cuts only reminded me that scars had made me stronger. Neighbors began to notice too. Mrs. Allen from across the street stopped by with apple pie, her eyes wide with admiration. "Loretta, everyone's talking about you. They say you stood tall, that you showed them who really held the power. Folks are proud." I thanked her politely, but pride wasn't what I felt. It was something colder, steadier, vindication. Days turned into weeks. Danielle moved back into the condo I still owned, but her lights often stayed dark, her curtains drawn. She had dreamed of climbing into Marjorie's world of glittering parties and society pages, but now she sat alone in silence, her phone buzzing with unreturned calls. And me, I walked my properties with a firmer step. Tenants greeted me warmly, unaware that the woman who collected their rent had just shaken the pillars of a wedding empire. I fixed leaky faucets, repainted stairwells, balanced my books. Each act was grounding a reminder that while others chased appearances, I had built substance. Yet beneath it all, a quiet sorrow lingered. Not for Marjorie, her ruin was well earned. Not even for Danielle's public shame. The sorrow was for the little girl who once clutched my hand, who once whispered, "Don't ever leave me, Mama." That child had been swallowed by vanity, by greed, by the poison of those who promised her the world if only she turned her back on me. But karma had a way of striking not with fire, but with silence, with absence. Danielle now lived in the silence she had cast me into, and as much as it hurt, it was justice. It was a cold Saturday morning when Tyrone called. "Loretta, you should come down to the courthouse. Marjorie's name has surfaced in the filings. She tried to shift blame for the canceled wedding onto you, but the paper trail is ironclad. If you want the truth aired, this is the moment." I didn't hesitate. By noon, I was standing outside the county courthouse, the winter air biting my cheeks. My coat was old, but pressed my shoes shined. When I stepped into the courtroom, I saw Danielle seated at the table with Marjorie, her hands trembling as she twisted a tissue. Marjorie sat rigid, her pearl necklace gleaming defiantly, though her eyes betrayed cracks. Jamal was in the back row, his face unreadable. The judge entered, gavel cracking. The proceedings began. Marjorie's lawyer launched into a speech painting me as a bitter mother who had sabotaged her own daughter's wedding out of spite. Danielle kept her head down, tears slipping silently. Tyrone rose calmly, a folder thick with documents in his hands. His voice carried the weight of years of preparation. Your Honor, every vendor contract was signed and paid for by my client, Ms. Loretta Johnson. Here are the invoices, the bank statements, the transfer receipts. There is no dispute about ownership. The moment my client withdrew consent services, we're legally obligated to cease. He laid each page before the judge, the sound of paper sharp in the hushed room. Gasps echoed when the florist's contract revealed Marjorie's signature had been forged sloppy desperate. The judge's eyes narrowed. This is a serious allegation. Marjorie shifted her composure, fracturing. It was clerical error, she muttered, but the damage was done. Tyrone wasn't finished. He pulled out photographs me at properties I had renovated me with tenants, proof of the empire I had built quietly. For decades, Ms. Johnson supported her daughter alone, often at great personal cost. She provided education, housing, even the very wedding that has become the subject of this case. To call her bitter or shameful is to ignore a lifetime of sacrifice. The judge looked toward me. Do you wish to speak? I rose slowly, every eye fixed on me. My hands did not shake. Your Honor, I came here not for revenge, but for truth. My daughter told me I was not invited to her wedding, that I was shame. She said this in front of strangers under the guidance of a woman who despised me. But everything in that wedding hall, from the flowers to the music, was paid for by me. I carried that child when no one else would. I fed her when I went hungry. I gave her every chance I never had. And still I was cast aside. Danielle lifted her head, then eyes red, voice breaking. Mom, I didn't mean, but I held up a hand, silencing her. Meaning doesn't erase actions. I stood in that ballroom, humiliated, erased, discarded. But the truth stands here today. I am not shame. I am the reason you stand at all. The silence in the courtroom was thunderous. Even Marjorie looked away. Her lips pressed thin, her empire of lies crumbling under the weight of paper and memory. The judge tapped the gavel once. The evidence is clear. All contracts are under Ms. Johnson's authority. Any claim otherwise is dismissed. This court recognizes her sole right in the matter. Relief swept through me, not joy, not triumph, but clarity. The truth had been spoken where it mattered, where lies could not distort. Outside, reporters waited, cameras flashing. One shouted, Ms. Johnson, do you have a comment? I paused, then spoke the only words that mattered. Never mistake humility for weakness, and never call sacrifice shame. Behind me, Danielle sobbed openly. Marjorie hissed at the cameras, and Jamal walked away without looking back. The world had seen. The truth had been nailed into record, permanent, undeniable. And I finally was free. Weeks passed. Winter slowly loosened its grip, but inside me something colder had thawed for good. The courthouse battle was behind me, the humiliation returned tenfold to those who had tried to erase me. Yet I didn't walk away with bitterness in my chest. What I carried now was lighter clarity, boundaries, and a future I would build for myself. Danielle moved out of the condo within a month. I heard through neighbors she went to stay with a friend, maybe even with Marjorie, though. Whispers said Marjorie's doors weren't as open as before. Their alliance had fractured under the weight of exposure. Society parties no longer called for Marjorie, and Danielle's phone no longer buzzed with invitations. The glittering world they clung to had turned its back, just as they once turned their backs on me. Karma doesn't shout it, whispers steady and sure. For me, life settled into rhythm again. I visited each of my properties not just as a landlord, but as a neighbor. Tenants invited me in for coffee, children hugged my waist when I brought them small gifts. I planted flowers outside one building, bright marigolds and violets that survived the chill. Watching them bloom reminded me growth comes from dirt, from darkness, but it can shine all the same. At night, I sat at my kitchen table and looked over my folders of deeds. They were more than paper. They were proof of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every time I swallowed my pride to keep moving. proof that I was never weak, never shameful, only underestimated. One evening, Mrs. Allen stopped by again with another pie. She leaned across the table, eyes warm. "Loretta, you know what people are saying now? They're saying you gave a lesson. That sometimes truth takes years, but when it comes, it levels the ground." I smiled. Not bitter, not triumphant, just steady. Then maybe that's enough. But I knew I could do more. So I set up a small scholarship fund named after my own mother, who once patched my dresses until her fingers bled. It wasn't grand, not yet, but it was real, helping young women from our neighborhood who dreamed bigger than their wallets. A legacy that didn't come with strings or shame. Danielle hasn't spoken to me since the courtroom. Perhaps she will one day. Perhaps she won't. Forgiveness isn't a door I have to open on anyone else's timetable. I've learned the hardest truth. Love, even for your own child, must sometimes stand behind boundaries to survive. To those of you watching this, especially my brothers and sisters over 50, I'll say this plain. Do not let anyone make you feel that sacrifice is shame. Do not let your children, your kin, your so-called friends erase the years you gave, the nights you worked, the meals you skipped. Your worth is not measured by their approval. It is measured by the foundation you built, the truth you carry, and the dignity you refuse to surrender. If you are listening from your living room, maybe with your own children grown and gone, ask yourself, have you been thanked properly? Have you been respected? And if not, remember, you are not powerless. Sometimes the strongest revenge is not anger, but proof. Sometimes it is standing tall in the very room they tried to push you out of and reminding them you are the reason they stand at all. I rebuilt my life not by chasing their apology, but by planting my own flowers, by writing my own legacy. And so can you. Now, friends, if this story touched you, if you've ever been cast aside by those you gave everything to, I invite you to share where you're watching from in the comments. Your stories matter too. Hit that like button if you believe sacrifice should never be mocked, and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of truth, justice, and dignity reclaimed. Because in the end, family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who shares your respect.